Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Selamat datang di program Silaturahmi Merdeka Belajar yang pada kesempatan kali ini menghadirkan edisi spesial dengan tema Hasil PISA dan Transformasi Pendidikan di Indonesia atau PISA Results and Transforming Education in Indonesia. Sahabat Dikbud, sejak tahun 2000, Indonesia telah mengikuti Program for International Student Assessment atau yang lebih dikenal dengan sebutan PISA. Sebuah program dari Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development atau OECD yang bertujuan untuk mengukur kompetensi murid dalam bidang literasi, numerasi, sains, serta aspek-aspek yang mendukung proses pembelajaran. Penilaian PISA bersifat diagnostik dan digunakan untuk memberikan informasi yang berguna untuk mengevaluasi sistem pendidikan. Sahabat Dikbud, segmen pertama Silaturahmi Merdeka Belajar kali ini mengangkat tema memaknai hasil PISA 2022 atau Interpreting the PISA 2022 Results. Dalam hasil PISA 2022 yang diikuti oleh 37 negara anggota OECD dan 44 negara mitra, pandemi COVID-19 menyebabkan penutupan sekolah sehingga membuat siswa di banyak negara mengalami kemunduran belajar atau learning loss. Dari hasil PISA 2022, diketahui bahwa skor literasi membaca internasional rata-rata turun 18 poin, skor literasi matematika internasional rata-rata turun 21 poin, dan skor literasi matematika internasional rata-rata turun 12 poin. Meski demikian, penurunan skor Indonesia berada di rata-rata atau lebih baik dari penurunan skor rata-rata internasional. Peringkat Indonesia pada PISA 2022 juga meningkat 5 hingga 6 posisi dibandingkan tahun 2018. Untuk memperdalam materi tersebut, mari kita simak bersama perbincangan para narasumber hebat dan inspiratif kita hari ini, Menteri Pendidikan, Kebudayaan, Riset, dan Teknologi Nadiem Anwar Makarim, Director for the Directorate of Education and Skills Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development atau OECD Andreas Schleicher, Kepala Badan Standar Kurikulum dan Asesmen Pendidikan atau BSKAP Anindito Aditomo, serta Direktur Jenderal Pendidikan Anak Usia Dini, Pendidikan Dasar dan Pendidikan Menengah atau PDM, Iwan Syahril, yang akan memoderasi jalannya bincang-bincang hari ini di Perpustakaan Kemendikbud RI.
Hello, good morning, Mas Menteri, Mas Nino.
Morning.
How are you today?
Very good, thank you.
It's such a lovely day today, and we're going to talk about PISA results and transforming Indonesian education, especially because there is a paper just published by OECD about the transformation in Indonesia's education and the wake of the recent PISA results. Yes. So we're going to talk about the content of the paper and maybe some more insights, especially from you and from Mas Nino, and also we have Andreas also in the Zoom. I'd like to say hello to Andreas. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, selamat pagi.
Oh, you know, selamat pagi. Selamat pagi, Andreas. I think it's not pagi there. I think it's evening. What time is it in Vancouver, right? Are you in Vancouver?
6 o'clock in the evening, yes.
6 o'clock in the evening, okay. Thank you so much for taking the time for having this session with us, especially discussing about the PISA results and transforming education in Indonesia. Actually, my first question is to you, Andreas. How do we make sense of the recent PISA results just in general, and how does Indonesia stand compared to other countries, especially in mitigating the impact of COVID-19?
You know, the last years have been tough for education systems. The pandemic, the school closures, disruptions that have occurred education has paid a toll for that. At the same time, Indonesia came through that crisis a lot better than most countries in the OECD area. If you look at the gap between Indonesia and the OECD in the year 2000, it was a lot larger than it is now. So in a sense, I think Indonesia managed the crisis quite well. We've also seen very successfully getting more students enrolled in school. If you would account for that effect, actually, you would see even stronger growth in outcomes. But apart from that, what struck me most is that Indonesia has one of the highest shares of resilient students. What I mean by that, these are students who come from poor families, from disadvantaged families, and still demonstrate really good results. Now, Indonesia is number 4 from the top on that kind of metric, which I think is a really good result. also, and that is a credit to your teachers. Indonesian students have reported one of the highest levels of support by their teachers. Now, they feel that their teachers took a real interest in them, understand who they are, who they want to become, accompanied them on their journey, even during school closures. I think that's a really good, very few countries have, higher levels of teacher support. Self-motivation. One of the things that was so important during the pandemic is that students, could learn on their own, that they could set their own learning goals, monitor their own learning progress, and have that motivation, that energy to advance. And once again, that's one of the dimensions where Indonesian students did particularly well. So I think there's a lot of energy in the system that makes me, confident there's going to be further improvement in the years to come.
Wow, that's quite a comprehensive and very nuanced of how the PISA results actually show the dynamics and improvement in Indonesian education system. And I think you've actually explained it, but I was wondering whether you can talk more about the literacy scores of, like many other countries, in Indonesia's results are declining, but less so than in an international average. So we improve our ranking actually globally as a result of that. On the other hand, the OECD also highlights other areas, like you mentioned, like teacher support, student well-being, student resilience. How do we make sense of this, Andreas?
Well, I think it's important that we look at those outcomes comprehensively. Students in their future, they need strong foundations, literacy, mathematics, build strong foundations. At the same time, their motivation to learn on their own, the fact that they are supported by their teachers. And by the way, Indonesian students were also quite well supported by the parents. Indonesia was one of the very few countries where we have seen an improvement in parental support. In most other countries, we've seen, unfortunately, a decline in parental engagement. And again, making education a whole of society enterprise is something that we can see, happening in Indonesia. And I do think that is very important to have a comprehensive set of outcomes where students are not just good in reading, math, and science, but also strong learners, motivated learners, have strong social outcomes. Can you live with yourself? Can you live with people who are different from you? Can you live with this planet? I mean, those are very, very important criteria for success today, and I do think they come out quite well for Indonesia.
Thank you so much, Andreas. Mas Dino, I'll turn to you now. So we know that PISA is conducted every 3 years, and we know that the ministry actually has national assessment and also other studies that maybe can be connected to the PISA results. Like what do you think? What do they say compared to the PISA results, both the national assessment and other related studies?
Well, one of the important lessons that we can learn from PISA is that good assessments can become powerful policy instruments. It can provide a wealth of information, just as Andreas mentioned just now, but it can also generate public discourse about what's important in education, right? I mean, PISA doesn't actually have actual powers over national policies, but the results are globally discussed. It directs the global discourse on education. In Indonesia as well, I mean, the release of the international results of PISA are taken as national events here, and they can generate quite passionate debates, including the last one. Right. So taking those lessons into account, we've also designed and implemented our own national assessments in Indonesia. It complements PISA in the sense that while PISA gives us a national level picture, our national assessments can provide us with the results from almost every school in Indonesia.
Right. So it's more granular.
It's more granular, right? So we assess a sample of students from grades 5, 8, and 11 from all schools in Indonesia, as well as almost all teachers from all of the schools in Indonesia. And like PISA, we measure students' learning outcomes in terms of reading literacy and numeracy or mathematical literacy. And like PISA, this is not about what students know, but this is about what they can do with that knowledge, right? It's not about the breadth of knowledge, but reasoning and critical thinking. We assess many aspects of the school quality as well, school climate, risk factors such as bullying, intolerance, violence in the schools, as well as teaching quality. So it's a comprehensive school-level assessment, which again complements PISA. And most important is that we provide the results back to the schools, and the district governments who actually run
so
the schools.
use the data.
We use the data as feedback. Formative feedback for annual planning based on evidence on teaching and learning quality, which is what we want our system to do, right? Continuous improvement directed towards teaching and learning improvements. And the last national assessment results in December 2023, it ended in December 23. We will release the results soon. And responding to your question, I think it gives a much more recent picture of our system, whereas PISA 2022 was conducted, I think, in April 2022, which was only a month after we reopened our schools. After 2 years of the pandemic. So it's still like the pandemic was still going on, right? Exactly, So basically the PISA results, the 2022 PISA results, give us a picture of the condition of our system after 2 years of school closure, after the disruption due to the pandemic. So it's like the lowest point, really. Yeah, we are at the lowest point of our system. Now, the national assessment gives us a picture of how whether we've progressed since that time. And it's very encouraging, the picture, because we can see, if we compare the results of the 2021 assessment to the latest one in 2023, we see significant improvements, both in literacy and numeracy across the board, in all levels of education, especially as well in among students who come from the lower socioeconomic background. This speaks back to Andreas's comment that we are quite resilient in our system.
And they're the ones disproportionately affected by COVID, right? And by online learning.
So whatever we are doing, Mas Menteri, it seems to show signs of positive effects in our system, including in mitigating the disproportionate impact of the pandemic to the lower socioeconomic bracket.
I see. Are there other studies that you can also share with us that talk about how Indonesia is doing during the pandemic, or just when the pandemic ended?
We have studies conducted with our colleagues from Inovasi, which is a partnership between Kemendikbud, the Indonesian government, and the Australian government. It's a smaller scale study, but it's valuable because it tracks the same students across different years. Coincidentally, we measured students' literacy and numeracy in primary school just before the pandemic in that study.
Oh, there's a data before the pandemic.
We didn't know that there was going to be a pandemic, right? But we have that data, and so we can track the progress of the same students going from grades 1 to 3 until grade 6 in the latest assessment. And consistent with the national assessment results, they show that there is learning recovery going on in our system. And that's, again, across the board, not only in the schools that have good facilities in the cities, but also in schools in rural areas as well.
I see. So I'll turn to you, Mas Menteri, for talking about the pandemic and what are the major education policies that Indonesia did during that time that resulted in what Andreas mentioned about our ecosystem in education, and also Mas Dino just also added like more nuance about actually we did very well in terms of coping with the pandemic. Maybe you can enlighten us about the major ones that made that happen.
Right. I mean, if you were all there during that time,
Right.
so you can imagine how stressful it was when that happened, right?
Yeah.
So there were so many emergency measures that we had to execute.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things why I think now looking back, why we bounced back so quickly, I can point to several things. And I think the first thing is we really were very pragmatic about what was needed for online learning to happen, so that there was not zero learning, but some learning. That was the first thing to happen. And one of the kind of breakthrough programs we had was we distributed phone credit minutes to in the largest ever distribution of minutes to students so that and teachers so that they were able to be able to bear the costs of all the high bandwidth video and Zoom sessions that were required for online learning. See, I think a lot of people in the developed countries take that for granted, how expensive actually the internet is for people in the global south. And so that was the first, I think, lever we had to do. And that allowed everyone to access online learning to do that. No matter how suboptimal it was, there's nothing worse than not learning at all and not being able to do online learning. So that was kind of the first kind of breakthrough policy, I think, that had the largest impact. It was also the one that in all of our surveys was perceived as the most helpful by all parties during that time. We also released a variety of free-to-use platforms for teachers to begin sharing with other teachers what are their best practices for online learning, because it was such a crash course for most teachers to try to adapt to this new model, and so they had to learn very quickly. So we provided all of these training platforms digitally for teachers to actually be able to understand what are the tips and tricks about online learning, how to engage your students, how to run a class, because it's very, very different to running a face-to-face class. And we had some direct-to-student content platforms through digital platforms, as well as through TV. If you remember, we had an entire TV channel during school hours dedicated to class content, mathematics, language, etc. So we distributed nationally through TV a bunch of content. There were also a few other policy changes which I felt had a big impact. One was to free the schools to actually use the budget depending on what they needed it for. There were a lot of restrictions before COVID about how schools can use their budgets. We really gave them a lot more freedom with which to maneuver around what was needed at that time. So I think deregulation, some level of deregulation on what schools could use their funding for was very, very necessary, because they started complaining that they were not able, like they don't, right now we don't need to buy books, you know, we need to buy maybe computers or screens or projectors for their teachers, etc. So there was a lot of issues there that were resolved. And then out of all of that, I would say that the most impactful was our quite brave decision at that time to offer all schools the option of doing an abbreviated, simplified version of the curriculum, right? Whereby the content was dramatically reduced to about 30-40%, if I'm not mistaken, to simplify the amount of content that had to be delivered during that time. And I think that was the game changer, whereby we've seen now that the schools that implemented that, what we call the kind of the emergency curriculum or the abbreviated simplified curriculum, they experience far less learning loss than the schools that didn't change to that simplified curriculum. So that, I think, bold move played a pivotal part in reducing the learning loss, but also gave us that really important clue that in curriculum, less is definitely more. So I thought that was very helpful in many ways. I would say those are some of the biggest policy changes that helped us, I think, bounce back much faster.
The learning loss, I think, was only 1/5 of schools compared to schools that implemented the full curriculum.
That's right, 1/5. That's an incredible statistic. just by focusing on less, but being able to
gain
go
more.
deeper.
Go deeper.
Yeah.
Wow, Mas Menteri, that's very interesting to know that we not only try to mitigate with pandemic, but we use the experience during the pandemic to actually to leap forward, right?
Yes.
That is kind of like also our experiment of like trying new ideas, learning that this less is actually more, actually, and not adding more content. That was very actually a brave move. I think many people were actually worried, but then we got the results. In theory, people already know that, but to implement that, a lot of people were not really confident to do that. But then pandemic made us
and that's
give us
that's the other side of a crisis, right? Yes, we suffered one of the most dramatic learning losses during this period. But at the same time, during that crisis, we learned so much about what are the essential principles of learning. By learning about learning loss, we're actually reframing how we view learning. And I think that's what gave also us the freedom or the license to make much more dramatic changes in policy moving forward. I'm not sure we would have been given the license to transform so many of the policies post-COVID if COVID did not happen. So it's bad that it absolutely happened, but it also provided that opportunity for a reset that was badly needed.
Also to give the choice, Mas Menteri, right? Like that is something that maybe if there is no COVID, we wouldn't be able to provide that kind of move, like to give option to use a different kind of curriculum.
That's right.
There is the full version, the simplified version, or the one that the school developed independently also. That was possible because there was COVID and crisis, so we were allowed to use that as to try this idea, and then it works because science knows that actually less is more.
That took courage and political, determination as well, because we could have just gone back to what we did before COVID, right?
Yeah.
It was an option too for the ministry, but we didn't.
Untuk guru-guru muda.
Teruntuk Pak Presiden, Mas Menteri, dan jajarannya.
Surat untuk Bapak Presiden. Untuk Pak Arifudin, guru bahasa Indonesia saya.
Untuk Pak Menteri Pendidikan dan Budaya.
Kepada guru-guru hebat masa depan.
Dulu saya tugas di desa. Saya masuk seperti saya orang yang dibuang. Tidak ada makna yang ada dalam benak dan pikiran saya. Bahkan saya cenderung bertindak keras pada mereka.
Dulu di sekolah lama, saya sering dibully.
Pak Menteri, anak saya dulu setiap pulang sekolah selalu menangis karena diganggu teman-temannya.
Di awal masuk sekolah, saya adalah anak yang nakal, yang tak pernah mendengar nasihat Bapak.
Membayangkan hal-hal yang saya sudah buat pada anak-anak, saya bersedih. Saya kadang-kadang merasakan bahwa kenapa saya begini? Kenapa saya harus memilih jadi guru? Kalau memang saya jadi guru hanya mau untuk melukai mereka.
Saat menulis surat ini, saya bersama dunia pendidikan Indonesia berada di masa yang kaya akan perubahan. Saya semakin mengenal murid-murid saya karena kesempatan yang diberikan kurikulum Merdeka untuk menyesuaikan pembelajaran dengan kebutuhan dan kondisi sekolah.
Saya merasa saya dan teman-teman lainnya memiliki perubahan dalam proses pembelajaran.
Banyak perubahan-perubahan yang terjadi dari pola pikir dalam mengajar. Dalam diri saya, mengajar lebih terasa bermakna di kurikulum Merdeka.
Sekarang di sekolah ini, saya menemukan tempat yang nyaman. Kemarin saya juara 1, lomba lari 100 meter, kejuaraan Paralimpik. Guru saya menemukan bakat dan kemampuan saya.
Anak saya istimewa, beda sama yang lain. Tapi saya sangat bangga dengan anak saya.
Ternyata jadi guru itu keren, banyak sesuatu yang luar biasa saat di sekolah. Ketika kita melihat potensi anak-anak, Ketika kita bisa memotivasi anak-anak untuk maju, itu sebagai kepuasan yang luar biasa.
Saya bersyukur karena dengan adanya kurikulum ini men-set dan batin saya lebih tenang. Sekarang ini saya lebih banyak bagaimana membuat murid itu bahagia. Karena ketika saya memberikan mereka kebahagiaan, pasti saya akan mendapatkan cara lain dari kebahagiaan yang Allah berikan pada saya. Dan itu hanya bisa ditemukan oleh kurikulum Merdeka.
Ketika saya diberikan tanggung jawab menjadi Ketua Pelaksanaan P5 tentang suara demokrasi, saya berpikir bagaimana saya menjadi pemimpin yang memilih calon pemimpin selanjutnya kalau saya murid yang kepala batu. Terima kasih Pak atas kepercayaan sehingga saya berubah.
Terima kasih Pak Presiden, terima kasih Pak Menteri Pendidikan.
Saya berharap untuk kedepannya kurikulum Merdeka bisa dilanjutkan karena berkesempatan untuk mengeluarkan bakat dan potensi siswa.
Saya harap untuk guru-guru yang lainnya, terutama guru-guru muda yang menjadi penerus saya, mari semangat menggali dan mengasah potensi murid-murid. Jangan sampai ada yang tertinggal.
Bapak dan Ibu guru hebat, saya titipkan senyuman cinta untuk anak-anak kita di masa depan ya. Dan yakinlah, kebahagiaan menjadi guru akan kembali bersemi di hati kita. Terima kasih.
Upaya meningkatkan kualitas pendidikan di Indonesia dapat dilakukan melalui pembenahan yang sesuai dengan kebutuhan dari tiap tingkat pemangku kepentingan. Mulai dari tingkat satuan pendidikan, pemerintah daerah di tingkat kota dan kabupaten, provinsi, hingga nasional. Upaya ini memerlukan gotong royong dari berbagai pihak untuk mengakselerasi transformasi pendidikan Indonesia. Tahukah Anda bahwa kita semua adalah bagian dari ekosistem yang dapat berperan dalam pembenahan kualitas pendidikan di Indonesia? Mulai dari kepala satuan pendidikan, guru, peserta didik, komite sekolah, orang tua murid, pemerintah daerah, hingga masyarakat, semua punya peran dalam meningkatkan kualitas pendidikan di Indonesia. Untuk itu, Kemendikbud Ristek mengembangkan rapor pendidikan yang berkaitan satu sama lain. Agar setiap pihak dapat melihat kondisi pendidikan di Indonesia, memetakan tantangan yang muncul, kemudian bergotong royong melakukan pembenahan sesuai kapasitasnya, mulai dari tingkat satuan pendidikan, pemerintah daerah hingga nasional. Terdapat 3 jenis rapor pendidikan berdasarkan cakupan datanya, yaitu rapor pendidikan untuk satuan pendidikan, rapor pendidikan untuk pemerintah daerah, dan rapor pendidikan Indonesia yang berkaitan satu sama lain. Yuk, simak penjelasan masing-masing platformnya. Pertama, rapor pendidikan untuk satuan pendidikan digunakan untuk perencanaan berbasis data atau PBD di tingkat satuan pendidikan. Kepala satuan pendidikan dan guru dapat melakukan proses identifikasi prioritas masalah, refleksi akar masalah, dan perencanaan pembenahan. Satuan pendidikan dapat melakukan perencanaan pembenahan yang sesuai dengan kondisi satuan pendidikan. Misalnya, melakukan pembenahan kualitas literasi atau numerasi, hingga iklim keamanan satuan pendidikan berdasarkan kondisi yang paling perlu perbaikan. Kini, platform ini juga dilengkapi fitur poster rapor pendidikan yang dapat diunduh untuk memberikan informasi secara ringkas mengenai hasil capaian satuan pendidikan. Hasil unduhan poster ini dapat dibagikan ke orang tua murid atau komite sekolah, atau dipajang di papan mading sekolah untuk memantik berbagai diskusi. Tujuannya, agar saat satuan pendidikan melakukan pembenahan, orang tua dan warga sekolah diharapkan dapat memberi masukan atau ide hingga berbagai dukungan dalam pelaksanaan pembenahan yang direncanakan. Selanjutnya, pada tingkat daerah terdapat rapor pendidikan untuk pemerintah daerah, yaitu Dinas Pendidikan Provinsi dan Kabupaten atau Kota yang membantu perumusan kegiatan dan anggaran daerah untuk pemenuhan standar pelayanan minimal atau SPM pendidikan di daerah kewenangannya. Di dalamnya terdapat capaian indeks SPM pendidikan, capaian indikator prioritas, akar masalah, serta cara pembenahan untuk melihat rekomendasi kegiatan pembenahan yang sudah dipetakan. Dengan platform ini, Kepala Dinas Pendidikan dan jajarannya, para pengawas, serta kepala daerah dapat berdiskusi membahas hasil SPM pendidikan hingga membuat alokasi anggaran untuk kegiatan pembenahan sesuai dengan prioritas yang disepakati oleh pemerintah daerah. Dan yang terakhir, pada tingkat nasional terdapat Rapor Pendidikan Indonesia yang dapat diakses oleh siapa saja, seperti warga sekolah, orang tua, dan pihak yang memiliki kepedulian terhadap kemajuan pendidikan di Indonesia. Rapor Pendidikan Indonesia merupakan upaya refleksi bersama membenahi kualitas pembelajaran murid di seluruh Indonesia. Pemanfaatan platform ini dapat membantu masyarakat untuk melihat capaian kualitas pendidikan di Indonesia secara menyeluruh dan mengawal upaya pembenahan kualitas pendidikan. Untuk mengakses Rapor Pendidikan Indonesia, Anda dapat mengunjungi laman raporpendidikan.kemdikbud.go.id. Dengan rapor pendidikan, diharapkan dapat mendukung setiap pihak dalam berperan meningkatkan kualitas pendidikan di Indonesia, mulai dari kebutuhan masing-masing. Kepala Satuan Pendidikan memahami akar masalah yang paling mendesak untuk dibenahi, orang tua murid memahami urgensi pembenahan yang paling mendesak di satuan pendidikan, pemerintah daerah dapat mengalokasikan anggaran dan mendistribusikan sumber daya dengan lebih sesuai kondisi, dan masyarakat dapat terus bergotong royong mengawal upaya pembenahan kualitas pendidikan. Karena kita semua yakin, saat semua pelaku pendidikan di Indonesia bergotong royong dan berupaya melakukan pembenahan yang sesuai kebutuhan, transformasi pendidikan yang didambakan dapat terakselerasi. Mari bersama-sama memanfaatkan rapor pendidikan, karena semua punya peran dalam pembenahan kualitas pendidikan Indonesia.
Sahabat Dikbud, di segmen kedua kali ini, tema yang akan diangkat adalah Merdeka Belajar dan sebuah paradigma baru dalam belajar atau Emancipated Learning and a New Paradigm of Learning. Sejak dilantik menjadi Menteri Pendidikan, Kebudayaan, Riset, dan Teknologi pada tahun 2019, Nadiem Anwar Makarim telah mencanangkan sebuah terobosan gerakan bersama yaitu Merdeka Belajar atau Emancipated Learning untuk meningkatkan kualitas sumber daya manusia di Indonesia melalui pendidikan. Program ini diinisiasi saat kualitas pendidikan di Indonesia memiliki masalah serius. Berdasarkan hasil PISA, sebanyak 70% anak-anak di Indonesia pada usia 15 tahun tidak mencapai kompetensi minimum pada bidang literasi dan numerasi. Untuk itu, Kemendikbud melalui program Merdeka Belajar menyediakan pendidikan berkualitas untuk semua kalangan. Sahabat Dikbud, untuk menggali lebih dalam lagi, mari kita simak kembali dialog Mendikbudristek Nadiem Anwar Makarim, Director for Directorate of Education and Skill OECD Andreas Schleicher, Kepala BSKAP Anindito Aditomo, dan tentu saja moderator istimewa kita, Direktur Jenderal PDM Iwan Syahril berikut ini.
So, Mas Menteri, maybe you can also maybe more comprehensively, Merdeka Belajar. What are the goals? What is Merdeka Belajar? What are the goals? And what are the key progress that you can maybe highlight to us?
Merdeka Belajar is translated as emancipated learning, right? So that's really a perfect way of seeing the essence of the transformation. It's an emancipation of a system that has been for decades static, rigid, administratively heavy, and not focused on the student learning, which is what learning is all about. Right? So emancipated learning is a new paradigm of student-centered learning, whereby what we are doing is emancipating schools and teachers to actually do their job, which is to encourage learning in the classroom. It seems so simple to say that, but anyone would be so shocked to see how many schools globally are not actually focused on learning. They are focused on administering a curriculum. Part of our breakthrough leadership program, Guru Penggerak or Mover Teachers, where now we are close to 100,000 of these Mover Teachers around Indonesia, is this mindset shift. Shifting from who are you? Are you as a teacher, are you a government administrator of curriculum? Which many of them actually assume that to be the case because that's honestly how the bureaucracy treats them.
Right.
Versus to become a facilitator of learning in the classroom, and that is their goal. So that's kind of the philosophy. What that translates into is a set of policies that have to attack all aspects of learning. Curriculum, teacher training, assessment, right? Mas Dino already spoke about the assessment. When we're not measuring the right things, it's extremely difficult for any systems to shift their goals. So just having the Assessment National telling all teachers that what matters is not how much information you can cram to your students, but what can they do with information?
Right.
What are the critical thinking and problem-solving skills that they can do if they are given a problem, if they are given data, if they are given a paragraph of reading? And I think that's what made every teacher initially confused about this, but then they started looking up, okay, what is numeracy? What is literacy? You see this massive relearning of critical thinking as a result of the assessment, national assessment, which very, very closely mimics PISA. Very closely mimics PISA. So we'll never be surprised again by PISA results. So I think that was the first kind of big moment, the signaling to all the teachers, this is what matters, not rote learning. I think the second thing is kind of the curriculum itself. You know, we just spoke about the impact of having a simplified curriculum to learning loss. So that's all the data we needed. Once we could prove to everyone that these schools that did a much more simplified, abbreviated version of the curriculum, they suffered so much less learning loss. That's when that gave us the license. Okay, now we have a new curriculum that we gave the option for people to adapt, and it was much more simplified. The learning goals were also less but more easy to understand. On top of that, not only did we do the simplification of the content, but we gave teachers the real authority to move up and down the learning outcomes. So teachers could move 2 years back, 2 years forward, depending on where they believe their students are. And we provided assessments through our digital platforms so that they can see where their students are at. And this really brings out this point about teaching at the right level. And without an educational system focusing on teaching at the right level, you will always have sometimes a majority of the class falling behind constantly. And this is the part where I want to be explicit. In a developing economy like Indonesia, educational systems have to always prioritize the proportion of students that are being left behind. That needs to be an explicit mandate of government policy to focus on them, on the ones that are most at risk, and really prioritize curriculum and teaching to focus on the ones that can potentially be falling behind. And that's what Teach at the Right Level does. It allows you to move up and down. Not only that, it gives teachers the freedom to also catch people up, kids that are behind and straggling, by also not overstructuring their week. Now teachers in elementary school can really focus on one concept and just do that for an entire week, because now we give them the requirements in a year, not every week. They don't have to keep switching around, so we give teachers freedom to do that as well. And of course, one major new, pretty radical transformation of the curriculum is project-based learning.
Project-based learning, yeah.
So we have given teachers the freedom to create projects and facilitate projects across themes like climate change, interethnic and interreligious tolerance, a variety of really interesting and fun themes to actually start building those collaborative skills, building the entrepreneurial mindset within students and within teachers. And of course, the final part of this emancipated learning is all of this must be executed in a scalable way, which means we launch one of the largest digital transformations in the country has ever seen. So we distributed laptops, projector screens, Wi-Fi routers to so many schools. We created free-to-use digital platforms. We built an entirely a large digital team to build free-to-use platforms. Teachers are now using our Teacher Super app that allows them to communicate with each other, build learning communities online, share videos to other teachers, because teachers learn best from other teachers. That's a fact, not from experts. Teachers learn best from other teachers, and that's how they can relate and get better over time. And so building that sharing platform where they can learn at their own pace, learn what interests them, what is most relevant to them, is what makes, I think, our PMM app now rated, I believe, what's the rating now? 4.9, still 4.9? Incredible,
so,
on the Android Play Store.
3.3 million users.
Just a huge amount of users on this platform. And that's because it's really, the ownership is back to the teachers. And a lot of the content is created by the teachers themselves. And so I think that's kind of what Merdeka Belajar is. That's what emancipated learning means in terms of tangible policies. And we believe that even though it takes time to learn this new paradigm, it is the only paradigm that optimizes classroom learning. That's and to optimize for people kids not falling behind. And that's really should be the primary goal of educational systems, particularly in the global South.
Oh, that's very, very comprehensive, Mas Menteri. And I've also visited many areas like schools around Indonesia, and initially I was surprised how they love project-based learning, Mas Menteri. And these are schools in remote areas, very minimum facilities. I just got back from Papua Barat Daya, and this is a very, very humble school, middle school, only 4 classes. Previously, like 3 years ago, this school was the school where parents wouldn't want to send their kids there. This is a private school, so very, very few students. And then they adopted Curriculum Merdeka, and project-based learning was the start, where students suddenly, all these naughty, at-risk students, suddenly engage in learning, and then they create project for water filter for the neighborhood around their school. And the people there in the neighborhood love this project because it helped them to get clean water. And then they're waiting for the next project. They ask the school principal, when are you going to do the next project? Because the middle school students from this at-risk students group before made something useful. And then now they got the confidence. And then they won the science Olympics in their province. And then got sent to Jakarta.
And that's
amazing.
I love stories like that. I love stories like that because they highlight that not everything is about numeracy and literacy. How in the world are you going to be able to train creativity, independence, and collaboration, collaborative teamwork, without doing projects? Like I know it's something you cannot. It's very hard to measure. Maybe Andreas PISA is starting to measure that, the ability to collaborate, but until now it's quite difficult. But there's no other way to train that, and the engagement, that level of engagement by students, having fun, working together. How in the world are you going to have lifelong learners if they are not associating the educational system and learning with fun and engagement? It just doesn't work. This is why fun and engagement is pivotal in the classroom environment, in the school environment, to create lifelong learners, right? And so I love those stories, no matter how difficult it is, right? Because it's so difficult for teachers to come up, okay, what project do I have to come up with? How does this work? Parents are coming up to me and said, my child didn't go home the other night because they had to do this project. Oh yes, this is the project for the emancipated girl. Yeah, but he stayed up over there because he had to calculate the profit of the canteen in the school. And I'm like, wow, that is super creative. So he was calculating, whether these pieces of bread or these snacks are actually making a profit in the school canteen. And I thought, I love that. I love that level of engagement and creativity that allows.
So thank you, Mas Menteri. Andreas, now I'm turning to you. You've heard a lot that we just talk about the minister and Mas Nino talk about the Merdeka Belajar initiatives. I was wondering, what do you think these initiatives compared to best practices around the world? Maybe you can also share with us.
Yeah, I think each of those initiatives are not new. You would find them in many high-performing education systems. What I do think makes Indonesia quite unique is you've introduced them all at the same time as part of a really coherent ecosystem. Now you have put student learning growth at the center, and then you have asked yourself, what kind of learning environments, what kind of pedagogies do we need to enable that student learning growth? And you've asked yourself, what people do you need to support those learning environments, the teachers and the educators? How do they relate to the students? Then you've asked yourself, what work organization do you need to provide to those people so that they can do their work, with the discretion and freedom that you outline? And I think that is, what makes Indonesia quite unique in this. If I look at the elements with a little bit more detail, on the curriculum, the move towards, or the shift from having students simply reproduce subject matter content to getting them to apply what they have learned and to transfer that learning. I think, the project-based learning experiences are absolutely pivotal for this. If students, what you remember from your own schooling will always be the kind of things you did, not the kind of things that people told you. And I think that's really important. I also think teaching fewer things at greater depth has been so important. The curriculum in Indonesia used to be overloaded, a kind of mile wide, inch deep, and it has now become much more focused and in a sense also more rigorous. It really focused much more on cognitive activation, getting students, to engage with the learning experience. I think that's really been, but again, you'd find that in most high-performing education systems, the focus on the foundations, on the cognitive, but also on the social and emotional foundations. I think as ministers outlined, that's equally important. And I think reforming assessment at the same time has been absolutely crucial. If you do not change the way in which we look at success, measure success, then, the signal to teachers is not very powerful. And I think the fact that you align that, change in curriculum with assessment is also, I think, something we can take away from many high-performing education systems. The fact that you freed up, teachers' energy by creating collaborative platforms, having teachers co-create curricula. Also that, I think, is a hallmark of high-performing education systems where instructional systems are really co-created, where information flows are not vertical but lateral, where teachers look upwards to the next teachers, where they become, good coaches, good mentors. I think the kind of implicit career structure, as I would call it, that you introduced by giving some teachers who are just very, very good at their job a bigger role in the system to become, designers of innovative learning environments, coaches and mentors. Also that is something that you'd find in many high-performing systems. But once again, you've made that part of a quite coherent, in a way, I think introducing this reform as one big package has been a tremendous opportunity. It's been a big experiment, but I also think it allowed you to build those linkages and relationships between the different elements of the reform. I think that's been incredibly powerful to create a new generation of pedagogical leaders, also really important, who will, and I think even as you move forward, artificial intelligence, all those powers around us, they command people at the front line who can reinvent, redesign the system. And I think you invest in the leadership capacity, and I think that's going to be incredibly important as well. This is actually an area where probably most education systems struggle. Most education systems are far more static than in Indonesia, particularly high-performing systems. They have been doing well for quite some time, and therefore, change becomes actually more difficult. I think this is really, a lesson probably the world can learn from this work in Indonesia. And then, also your courage and willingness to invest in quite innovative digital tools for knowledge sharing, for knowledge mobilization, to make teachers, part of the, overall system design. I think this has been, I think all of the elements you'd find somewhere else in the world. So each of those elements is not particularly innovative, but the way you've put them together in a coherent ecosystem, I think makes this in a quite, groundbreaking experiment. And you can see, in a way, I think many of the PISA results mirror that. The fact that the quality of student-teacher relationship is strong. That social fabric in school, that students do not just perceive their teachers as an instructor, but also as a coach, as a mentor, as a facilitator, as an evaluator, as a social worker. Now, I think these are very, very positive signs that, that effort is working out. The fact that parents become, a bigger part of the equation, that they are not seeing themselves as clients, but, as, again, co-creators of the system. Also, that, I think, is a reflection of a system that is becoming more open, that is becoming more engaged, that's becoming more transparent. The way in which you report on outcomes, I think, is very innovative, making sure that society, communities do understand how students perform and how schools are progressing, not in a punitive way, but in a way that helps them to be part of that, trajectory. I think these are all, I think, really, incredible achievements.
Thank you, Andreas. You highlighted the assessment and also the teacher participation in the professional learning community. And in the OECD paper, there is the notion that you wrote that teacher at the center of the curriculum implementation and a teacher assessment literacy, and also a new model of professional learning that you highlighted from looking at Indonesian example. Can you elaborate on that, like the teacher, the center of the curriculum implementation, and having the assessment literacy for teachers, and within the context of the professional learning community?
Yeah, I think the way you have implemented your reforms bring teachers not just at the center, but create that ownership for the ideas of the curriculum. What we often see in classrooms is that teachers implement the curriculum very notionally. They just look at instructions and they put those into practice. And I think you have, given teachers ownership of the ideas and given them the discretion to see, what do I do with these ideas with the kind of students I have in front of me? And that gives teachers, room to create, but also, a kind of accountability towards the students. I need to look at the kind of students I have in front of me. And this is really what a well-implemented curriculum is all about. The curriculum is about the idea, about the what we value in education. But you have given teachers the discretion, the empowerment, and support to actually, make that happen for their specific students in their background. And as the minister has outlined before, it is easy to do that with students from wealthy backgrounds. You have all the support at home, but actually as a teacher to understand that different students learn differently and to embrace that diversity of students with differentiated support, with different pedagogical practice. I think that's really the outcomes of this. And no teacher can do that alone. That's why the creation of professional learning communities has been such a crucial part of this, connecting teachers as a profession, building ownership among teachers of their profession. And I think all of those elements really will help you to build, in the long run, a very strong profession.
Thank you, Andreas.
Untuk guru-guru muda.
Teruntuk Pak Presiden, Mas Menteri, dan jajarannya.
Surat untuk Bapak Presiden, untuk Pak Arifudin, guru bahasa Indonesia saya.
Untuk Pak Menteri Pendidikan dan Budaya.
Kepada guru-guru hebat masa depan.
Dulu saya tugas di desa. Saya masuk seperti saya orang yang dibuang. Tidak ada makna yang ada dalam benak dan pikiran saya. Bahkan saya cenderung bertindak keras pada mereka.
Dulu di sekolah lama, saya sering dibully.
Pak Menteri, anak saya dulu setiap pulang sekolah selalu menangis karena diganggu teman-temannya.
Di awal masuk sekolah, saya adalah anak yang nakal, yang tak pernah mendengar nasihat Bapak.
Membayangkan hal-hal yang saya sudah buat pada anak-anak saya bersedih. Saya kadang-kadang merasakan bahwa kenapa saya begini? Kenapa saya harus memilih jadi guru? Kalau memang saya jadi guru hanya mau untuk melukai mereka.
Saat menulis surat ini, saya bersama dunia pendidikan Indonesia berada di masa yang kaya akan perubahan. Saya semakin mengenal murid-murid saya karena kesempatan yang diberikan kurikulum Merdeka untuk menyesuaikan pembelajaran dengan kebutuhan dan kondisi sekolah.
Saya merasa saya dan teman-teman lainnya memiliki perubahan dalam proses pembelajaran.
Banyak perubahan-perubahan yang terjadi dari pola pikir dalam mengajar. Dalam diri saya, mengajar lebih terasa bermakna di kurikulum Merdeka.
Sekarang di sekolah ini, saya menemukan tempat yang nyaman. Kemarin saya juara 1, lomba lari 100 meter, kejuaraan Paralimpik. Guru saya menemukan bakat dan kemampuan saya.
Anak saya istimewa, beda sama yang lain. Tapi saya sangat bangga dengan anak saya.
Ternyata jadi guru itu keren, banyak sesuatu yang luar biasa saat di sekolah. Ketika kita melihat potensi anak-anak, ketika kita bisa memotivasi anak-anak untuk maju, itu sebagai kepuasan yang luar biasa.
Saya bersyukur karena dengan adanya kurikulum ini, men-set dan batin saya lebih tenang. Sekarang ini saya lebih banyak bagaimana membuat murid itu bahagia. Karena ketika saya memberikan mereka kebahagiaan, pasti saya akan mendapatkan cara lain dari kebahagiaan yang Allah berikan pada saya. Dan itu hanya bisa ditemukan oleh kurikulum Merdeka.
Ketika saya diberikan tanggung jawab menjadi Ketua Pelaksanaan P5 tentang suara demokrasi, saya berpikir bagaimana saya menjadi pemimpin yang memilih calon pemimpin selanjutnya kalau saya murid yang kepala batu. Terima kasih Pak atas kepercayaan sehingga saya berubah. Terima kasih Pak Presiden, terima kasih Pak Menteri Pendidikan.
Saya berharap untuk kedepannya kurikulum Merdeka bisa dilanjutkan karena berkesempatan untuk mengeluarkan bakat dan potensi siswa.
Saya harap untuk guru-guru yang lainnya, terutama guru-guru muda yang menjadi penerus saya, mari semangat menggali dan mengasah potensi murid-murid. Jangan sampai ada yang tertinggal.
Bapak dan Ibu guru hebat, saya titipkan senyuman cinta untuk anak-anak kita di masa depan ya. Dan yakinlah, kebahagiaan menjadi guru akan kembali bersemi di hati kita. Terima kasih.
Upaya meningkatkan kualitas pendidikan di Indonesia dapat dilakukan melalui pembenahan yang sesuai dengan kebutuhan dari tiap tingkat pemangku kepentingan. Mulai dari tingkat satuan pendidikan, pemerintah daerah di tingkat kota dan kabupaten, provinsi, hingga nasional. Upaya ini memerlukan gotong royong dari berbagai pihak untuk mengakselerasi transformasi pendidikan Indonesia. Tahukah Anda bahwa kita semua adalah bagian dari ekosistem yang dapat berperan dalam pembenahan kualitas pendidikan di Indonesia? Mulai dari kepala satuan pendidikan, guru, peserta didik, komite sekolah, orang tua murid, pemerintah daerah, hingga masyarakat, semua punya peran dalam meningkatkan kualitas pendidikan di Indonesia. Untuk itu, Kemendikbud RI mengembangkan rapor pendidikan yang berkaitan satu sama lain. Agar setiap pihak dapat melihat kondisi pendidikan di Indonesia, memetakan tantangan yang muncul, kemudian bergotong royong melakukan pembenahan sesuai kapasitasnya, mulai dari tingkat satuan pendidikan, pemerintah daerah hingga nasional. Terdapat 3 jenis rapor pendidikan berdasarkan cakupan datanya, yaitu rapor pendidikan untuk satuan pendidikan, rapor pendidikan untuk pemerintah daerah, dan rapor pendidikan Indonesia yang berkaitan satu sama lain. Yuk, simak penjelasan masing-masing platformnya. Pertama, rapor pendidikan untuk satuan pendidikan digunakan untuk perencanaan berbasis data atau PBD di tingkat satuan pendidikan. Kepala Satuan Pendidikan dan guru dapat melakukan proses identifikasi prioritas masalah, refleksi akar masalah, dan perencanaan pembenahan. Satuan pendidikan dapat melakukan perencanaan pembenahan yang sesuai dengan kondisi satuan pendidikan. Misalnya, melakukan pembenahan kualitas literasi atau numerasi, hingga iklim keamanan satuan pendidikan berdasarkan kondisi yang paling perlu perbaikan. Kini, platform ini juga dilengkapi fitur poster rapor pendidikan yang dapat diunduh untuk memberikan informasi secara ringkas mengenai hasil capaian satuan pendidikan. Hasil unduhan poster ini dapat dibagikan ke orang tua murid atau komite sekolah atau dipajang di papan mading sekolah untuk memantik berbagai diskusi. Tujuannya agar saat satuan pendidikan melakukan pembenahan, orang tua dan warga sekolah diharapkan dapat memberi masukan atau ide hingga berbagai dukungan dalam pelaksanaan pembenahan yang direncanakan. Selanjutnya, pada tingkat daerah terdapat rapor pendidikan untuk pemerintah daerah, yaitu Dinas Pendidikan Provinsi dan Kabupaten atau Kota yang membantu perumusan kegiatan dan anggaran daerah untuk pemenuhan standar pelayanan minimal atau SPM pendidikan di daerah kewenangannya. Di dalamnya terdapat capaian indeks SPM pendidikan, capaian indikator prioritas, akar masalah, serta cara pembenahan untuk melihat rekomendasi kegiatan pembenahan yang sudah dipetakan. Dengan platform ini, Kepala Dinas Pendidikan dan jajarannya, para pengawas, serta kepala daerah dapat berdiskusi membahas hasil SPM pendidikan hingga membuat alokasi anggaran untuk kegiatan pembenahan sesuai dengan prioritas yang disepakati oleh pemerintah daerah. Dan yang terakhir, pada tingkat nasional terdapat Rapor Pendidikan Indonesia yang dapat diakses oleh siapa saja, seperti warga sekolah, orang tua, dan pihak yang memiliki kepedulian terhadap kemajuan pendidikan di Indonesia. Rapor Pendidikan Indonesia merupakan upaya refleksi bersama membenahi kualitas pembelajaran murid di seluruh Indonesia. Pemanfaatan platform ini dapat membantu masyarakat untuk melihat capaian kualitas pendidikan di Indonesia secara menyeluruh dan mengawal upaya pembenahan kualitas pendidikan. Untuk mengakses Rapor Pendidikan Indonesia, Anda dapat mengunjungi laman raporpendidikan.kemdikbud.go.id. Dengan rapor pendidikan, diharapkan dapat mendukung setiap pihak dalam berperan meningkatkan kualitas pendidikan di Indonesia, mulai dari kebutuhan masing-masing. Kepala Satuan Pendidikan memahami akar masalah yang paling mendesak untuk dibenahi, orang tua murid memahami urgensi pembenahan yang paling mendesak di satuan pendidikan, pemerintah daerah dapat mengalokasikan anggaran dan mendistribusikan sumber daya dengan lebih sesuai kondisi, dan masyarakat dapat terus bergotong royong mengawal upaya pembenahan kualitas pendidikan. Karena kita semua yakin, saat semua pelaku pendidikan di Indonesia bergotong royong dan berupaya melakukan pembenahan yang sesuai kebutuhan, transformasi pendidikan yang didambakan dapat terakselerasi. Mari bersama-sama memanfaatkan rapor pendidikan, karena semua punya peran dalam pembenahan kualitas pendidikan Indonesia.
Sahabat Dikbud, kita memasuki segmen ketiga dengan subtema Langkah ke Depan atau Way Forward. Setelah memaknai hasil PISA 2022 dan mendalami konsep Merdeka Belajar, menjaga transformasi pendidikan Indonesia ke arah lebih baik di masa mendatang tentu menjadi harapan kita bersama. Selain itu, kurikulum pendidikan yang dapat mengikuti perubahan zaman serta dinamika situasi sosial politik yang terjadi juga dinilai sangat penting. Lalu, langkah apa saja yang akan dilakukan Kemendikbudristek untuk menjaga kemajuan ini? Untuk menjawabnya, diskusi dengan para narasumber hebat kita masih akan terus berlanjut dalam segmen berikut ini.
And now I turn to Mas Nino. We just talk a lot about the minister talk about the simplified curriculum and how we know that it's more effective. We've seen it from during the pandemic, and now the curriculum Merdeka, all the stories that we hear from the field. It's amazing what's happening even in the schools. Areas are very, very limited in terms of resources. They're able to make progress and innovation and impress not only their school community, but the wider community. Now we know that the new curriculum Merdeka, will be soon announced as the only national curriculum. So why do you think this is important in our transformation, in education transformation, and how can we ensure the successful implementation of it?
A lot of the reasons were articulated very well by Mas Menteri and underscored by Andreas as well. But curriculum change is often quite political. Some people are skeptical about the need for curriculum change, saying that why tinker with the curriculum when teachers' competencies are what's more important? Right? That's true, of course. We don't deny that. Even our theory of change places teachers and principals at the center of the reform. But on the other hand, even the skilled teachers need
the curriculum.
A good curriculum. It's like providing drivers with a better map. However skilled the driver is, if the map is points to the wrong direction, then it will be difficult for them to get to where we want. They'll get lost, basically, right? And stories that you mentioned is really powerful as well to illustrate how the curriculum helps teachers to shift their mindset. So that's what the minister mentioned. It's our whole reform depends on the shift of mindsets of the principals from being government officials who are compliant to the rules from the district governments and from the ministry to become instruction leaders, to provide to change the schools to become environments where teachers can learn from each other, the teacher professional learning communities, right? And mind shifts of teachers from administrators of the curriculum to become facilitators of student learning.
The co-creator of
the co-creators of students' learning journey. And that requires a curriculum that is designed to help them to not only to encourage them, but to make it easy for them to actually become facilitators of student learning. And stories from schools are always very, very powerful. I remember a school, a very humble school as well, in West Lombok. The principal told me a story about one grade 5 student who was considered very naughty. Never listening to the teachers, always running around in the classroom. But then when they did the assessment, what we call diagnostic assessment at the beginning of the semester, to all students, because they were implementing the new curriculum, and one of the things that we told one of the ideas that we provided to the schools were, it's very important for you to assess where students are at the beginning of the semester. And when they did that, they were so surprised. A lot of the grades 3, 4, 5, even 6 students, some of them still couldn't read. Couldn't, let alone understand a paragraph. They couldn't decode a full sentence, including this one naughty boy. Right?
In the grade 5.
In grade 5. So it was a revelation for them. Oh my God, what have we been doing all these years? And when they realized that, they adjusted their curriculum, adjusted their lesson plans, and they provided like remedials for the students who are falling behind, including this boy. And you know what? In a matter of 2 or 3 months, this boy was able to read, and then he became a passionate learner. So that was very powerful. It's
and you hear that in so many schools. You hear this. This is a recurring story.
Recurring stories,
about this aha moment of teachers in this new curriculum when they finally see, oh, okay, I have to reset. how do I do this?
Yeah, so it's not only a change in practice, but it's a change in
mindset.
Awareness, mindset of who they are, what they should be doing as teachers. So that's why a curriculum that is designed to do that is so important. In addition to, of course, developing teachers and principals' capacities in understanding and taking the initiative and implementing this correctly. And yes, we are about to launch the new curriculum Merdeka, what we call it, as the new national curriculum.
But already 80% of our schools have already adopted voluntarily Curriculum Merdeka. So it's really about now it's time to make it for everyone, right?
So this is a formalization, really. That was what we were worried about, right? Okay, we are going to change the national curriculum. How do we manage the transition? So what we did was we offered the national curriculum as an option for schools to adopt, starting from 2022.
2022, yeah.
And to our surprise, 140,000 schools across Indonesia,
43%,
voluntarily adopted the new curriculum.
Yeah.
And then the next year, an additional 160,000 schools, more schools. So basically, 80% of the schools have already at least begun to learn about the principles, the ideas, and implementing parts of the curriculum.
Can we just emphasize that that's the power of choice?
Yeah.
Giving freedom to schools to have the agency to choose, okay, I want to try this new curriculum. It was much faster than us forcing it on them. It turned out to adopt far faster than if we had forced everyone to change the curriculum.
And that's amazing, isn't it? Because it shows that when teachers and principals are given the trust to become leaders, to become professional educators, they're able to do that. And just one more thing I want to mention is that the national assessment actually shows much better improvements.
The learning recovery, right?
The learning recovery. So if we compare the 23 assessment to the 21 assessment, so 2 years of worth of schooling, schools that have adopted voluntarily the new national curriculum jumped ahead in many cases 2 to 3 times compared to schools that still is implementing the previous curriculum, which is too heavy in content, basically. So that again underscores the importance of...
and that improvement, correct me if I'm wrong, that improvement compounds over time.
It compounds over time.
So the schools that adopted the new curriculum earlier, they're well ahead.
They're much
well ahead than the rest. So over time, through 2 to 3 years of implementing this, the acceleration of numeracy and literacy is far greater the ones that did not.
And it's especially important in the rural areas, apparently. The data shows.
It's consistent about addressing the inequalities.
Addressing the inequality. So in rural areas,
decreasing the gap.
Schools implementing the previous curriculum, in some cases, even declined. I can't remember whether it's in literacy or numeracy and which level, but there are declines. So learning loss apparently still happens in some schools in the rural areas if they focus on too much content, basically.
Amazing.
All right, Mas Menteri, now we asked the most favorite question recently. We know that there is a change of politics that is happening in Indonesia. And I think this is not only in Indonesia, but also actually around the world, Mas Menteri, that people were asking, how can we ensure the continuity and sustainability of Merdeka Belajar, the current momentum of our education transformation? How would you respond to this question?
Well, I think that from the very beginning, we knew that this transition was going to happen. So you remember very early in our meetings when we were deciding what to do, and we were filtering different activities based on the impact. It wasn't just impact that made us decide what to prioritize, but it was also irreversibility.
Right.
Remember that?
Yep.
So we had this criteria for irreversibility, like how can we, let's only focus on things that will be very hard to turn back. Because I think that's a very important pillar of continuity.
Right.
So I think that the first principle to do this is by, instead of viewing our policies as government top-down imposed, that we're actually trying to trigger grassroots movements. So program Guru Penggerak, mover teachers, is a perfect example of that, where we have created 100,000 champions in multiple levels, who will then become principals and superintendents all across Indonesia, who are believers. They are believers in Merdeka Belajar, and their training for 6 to 9 months was all about the belief and the mindset changes, and the leadership training to influence teachers around them. So that's hard to turn back. When you have, my hope is that those mover teachers all across Indonesia will become influencers. They already are, because I've heard in various places. By the way, we don't pay them anything extra.
Right.
It's incredible. They're doing this purely out of their own extra work, purely out of their own motivation to change. And those teachers will become, will convert other teachers to this paradigm over time. So that's exponential to hit that tipping point. I think the other thing is how to make this irreversible is that you cannot force a curriculum if it does not benefit the learning experience for teachers and for principals. So if it doesn't work, they are going to want a new change. But if you have a new curriculum that has been already voluntarily accepted by 80% of the schools out there, 70–80% of the schools out there, it is going to be very hard for someone to impose a totally new curriculum when they have chosen to have that curriculum. So that's another thing. The third, I think, factor of sustainability is the digital revolution that we have triggered. The platforms they are using, the stickiness of all the apps and the platforms that have already been ingrained in their lives, not because someone forced them to use it, but because it's just better.
Right.
It's better.
It helps them.
Yeah. So the adoption, organic adoption, is going to be very hard to detach and dismantle. And because all of those platforms support the policy initiatives, you can't pull one without pulling the other, right? So there's a certain level of stickiness that I think will persist over time. Once you have tasted the fruits of student-centered learning, I think people will be very aggressive in defending it. I think teachers and principals, which may not be the majority yet in the schools out there, but I think if we can get to 30% of schools already being true believers in this, which I think we already have, it's going to be very hard to reverse. Very hard to reverse. So I think that those are kind of the principles of sustainability. Make it into a movement instead of a policy. Really focus on the bottom-up influencers and change agents, and also try to create choice in the system to make people feel good about making choices, feeling good about being emancipated, and building that confidence to actually doing what's best for their own school instead of what they think the government wants them to do. I think that's really...
Own the reform.
Exactly. Owning the reform. You're right. That's the best way of putting it. Owning the reform. Make it that it's theirs. That's going to be hard to dismantle.
Yeah. I just remember talking to a principal, and she said, "Sir, we have fallen in love with Merdeka Belajar." So the use is fallen in love. Please don't let us be broken-hearted.
Don't break our hearts.
Yeah, so it's amazing the choice of words that this principal used, because like you said, Mas Menteri, so like really like believers in this. They're owning it, and this principal has been be a teacher and principal for close to 30 years. So she said, like, I've never felt like this liberated and very, very meaningful doing my job than what I'm doing now. So it's like the very first time.
Whenever I go to the regions, and it's always the question they ask: what happens after you leave? All right, what happens after the new president comes in? And I always turn back and say, look, ultimately, it's going to be up to you. If you want this to continue, and you are vocal about it, and you discuss it, and you unite with the other teachers in your neighborhood to sustain this, there will be nothing that the government can do to stop you. You own these schools. You are the teachers and principals. If you want to push it in a direction, it will be very hard for governments to push you in a different direction. So it's up to you. I always say it's up to you. It's your school. You know, you're the one that's empowered to do this. So defend it vocally, and we will continue in this direction. I believe ultimately it depends on the principals and teachers carrying this program forward.
Okay. Thank you, Mas Menteri. Andreas, last question to you. So, how do you think like the current momentum in Indonesia's education transformation can go forward, and so we can carry the momentum and hopefully doing even better in the next PISA assessment?
Yeah, I think it will be very important to turn that enthusiasm and momentum that you have built into sustainable and long-term change. And I don't think it's trivial. I think it really depends on the people at the front line, the ownership among teachers, among parents, among school leaders, among administrators. And I think it requires continuous review. I think that's very, very important. Times will change, requirements will change, and ownership will mean that there needs to be a process of, for example, curriculum review, curriculum refinement. And I think that's going to be critically important. The second point I would make is to invest in codifying knowledge and experience. To make the good ideas, the good experience systemic requires that they are somehow, transported, that teachers across the system have access to the best practices, the best ideas in the system. And the more robust that system becomes, the less volatile will it be to political decisions of any form. Now, the more you have actually, if the implemented curriculum, if good ideas become good practice and good practice becomes culture, you have changed the system and made it really, I think, immune against kind of volatile decisions. I think that's really important. And I think last but not least, having good evidence and data, what will convince the public in the long run is to see continued improvement on the dimensions that Indonesia values. And so having good metrics, being very transparent about where the system is progressing, where there are remaining gaps, being good at, aligning resources with needs as you have done, I think that will continue to be incredibly important. I think those elements will make a reform sustainable. That's what we can learn from education systems that have improved over the long run. And I think you have to, the Merdeka reform is a reform of at least a decade. I think this is something I think you need to factor into this. I think you've put that on track. You have built the momentum, but I think it is a non-trivial challenge actually to make that sustainable and to go the last mile. To convince the last 20% of the schools that this is a good idea. But, I'm confident. I think you have put the emphasis on the right part, namely on ownership at the front line. That is, what would secure long-term implementation.
Okay. Thank you so much, Andreas, Mas Menteri and Mas Nino. I think that concludes our discussion for today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mas Menteri.
Thank you, Andreas.
Thank you.
Sahabat Dikbud, kita telah sampai pada penghujung acara Silaturahmi Merdeka Belajar edisi spesial Hasil PISA dan Transformasi Pendidikan di Indonesia. Mari terus bekerja sama dan berkolaborasi untuk melanjutkan gerakan Merdeka Belajar demi memperkuat transformasi pendidikan di Indonesia. Saya Arta Sisilia pamit undur diri. Terima kasih untuk kebersamaan sahabat Dikbud dalam Silaturahmi Merdeka Belajar edisi spesial hari ini. Salam Merdeka Belajar.